Hi there, my name is Louis Taylor and I'm a composer based in Bristol. This video is all about how you can blend virtual instruments with live recordings to get the best quality but affordable sound for your media projects, whether it be film, television, YouTube, anything, Netflix, anything you're doing, video games. This is a great set of tips that I use all the time whenever I'm doing a score. I get some live instruments and I put them on top of my virtual instrument bed and layer them on, mix them nicely, and it just brings this whole depth, this whole new dimension to the music, reality basically. So I've got 6 tips for you to help you understand how to do this the best you can. Tip number 1, provide quality instructions for your performance. What I would recommend is to make sure, the first thing that you do is that you make sure your score is very well produced, very clear, and has some very useful instructions for the people that you're giving it to. The performers will often find it much more useful if you provide anecdotal or some, genuine written meaning to the music. If you provide this for them, they can quite often pour their heart and soul into the music by understanding the character of the theme, for example, or whoever, the emotions that are actually happening in the film, the depth behind the story. They can put that insight into the music and how they perform, because, a sad piece of music is very different to a sad piece of music that is also accompanied by somebody dying or somebody losing their loved one or something like that. And if you provide that sort of text on the score, they will read that, and quite often I have some amazing results where they pour their heart and soul into the performance and it sounds incredible, and I would really recommend that you use this tip to start with. Tip number 2, make sure that you prioritise the live instruments in the mix. What I mean by this is that you make sure that you retain the expressive and dynamic qualities that your live musicians have provided you with. Your sample libraries have no expressive control in comparison to a human being. The most that they can do is change their volumes accordingly to the emotion on the screen or to your preference. And there are, of course, modulation wheels and stuff like that you can get the best results from. And you can get some really good results if you make the most of those things. But in my experience, they don't even compare to real life human beings playing the music. Tip number 3, adjust and automate the volume levels accordingly. What I mean by this is that when you plonk your live recording files straight onto your DAW session, what I find is that, especially if you're using a number of solo instrument recordings stacked on top of each other, for example, you have 30 strings, maybe 40 strings in the sample library, but you have 5 real players to layer on top of those, each section of the string section. I find that when you layer them on top of each other, their volume levels are going to be completely different to one another, especially if they haven't been recorded by the same person, or if they've been recorded in different rooms at different times. So what you're going to have to do is adjust the volume levels accordingly to match the sample libraries. Quite often the sample libraries won't be able to reach the same level of loudness as the real recordings, in my experience. The next thing I would make sure to do is to apply some EQ and cut out the frequencies that are unused. What I mean by this is that you need to make sure that, first of all, any little frequencies in the recordings you don't like are mitigated to the best of your ability. Create some. This depends entirely on the individual recording, the individual performer, and the individual instrument. So there is no bog standard way to put EQ. However, something that you can do for most instruments is remove the frequencies, cut off the frequencies that are just not being used by that instrument or that are not audible to our ears. Because although it might not seem like there's a difference being made, actually it will make your mix quite a lot clearer, and it will mean that lower or higher frequencies don't interfere with the frequencies that are lower or higher on other instruments, and so therefore making your mix clearer because there's less interference with the frequencies that are happening. Tip number 5, apply some reverb, but don't make it too wet. Now, the reason for this is that, first of all, your sample libraries will have been recorded in halls, great big halls like Air Studios. A lot of Spitfire libraries are in Air Studios, and they're glorious, they sound fantastic, they have this amazing natural reverb that they've recorded into these sample libraries. The only issue is that when you get a solo instrument, for example, and you put that in on top of the sample library, it tends to be a lot drier because they've recorded it with a close mic and maybe a tree mic, but tends to be in a studio if it's a solo instrument, or in their own room, or at home for them. Some musicians are doing it at home these days, because of the pandemic. They've set up these home recording studios, and they're just not going to be the same sorts of quality or the same sort of reverb as something you would get in Air Studios or Abbey Road. And so what I would do is apply some reverb to those instruments. You can either do this separately, or you can apply it to the bus and remove the reverb from the sample libraries. And you can also, I quite often use close mics anyway, because that's kind of my preference, but you can do whatever you like on the sample libraries. The reason why I kind of do that is so that I get quite a lot of expressive freedom with the reverb that way. If I put the close mics on all of them, then everything is close, especially if I'm mixing close recordings with live recordings, then everything sounds close and you can get a nice balanced reverb tail. However, there's always the option of maintaining the reverb hall that they've recorded and then including reverb on the individual / a bus for the live recordings. You can add more than one reverb. I actually have recently done a score where I added 3 reverbs to a string bus because they all perform different functions. For the master bus of the string section, I used an instance of Panagement 2, and I'll try and link these in the description below if I can. This is actually a free plugin. It's great. The one reason I used it more than another reverb is because it has a function which allows you to place your recordings at a different point in the room. So it makes it glue everything together that's in that bus and make it sound like it's truly in that space. And then I essentially moved it around in the room, placed it where I wanted to be, and it sounded great to my ears. My final tip number 6, minimal compression, if any. Now, my reason for saying this is because I personally am against, to an extent, I'm not really against it on a dogmatic point of view, but generally speaking, I don't think it's a good idea from my preference at least. Especially in more classical or traditional scores, whether it be film or game or whatever, especially classical music though. For a string section or, a live section like that, brass winds, whatever, I would personally avoid using compression. Sometimes I don't use it at all because I think that by doing that you are essentially ruining the wonderful dynamic contrast that the performers have provided you with themselves. I think that some compression can go a long way, a small amount, because it can really help glue the whole bus or the whole section together very nicely. However, I would say that tend to avoid it with these sorts of classical traditional scores. If you're in a pop song or whatever, it's very different. It is very different in pop music or in jazz as well sometimes, maybe not so much with jazz, but with these more commercial type musics, I would say that you really want some of that nice balanced volume levels throughout everything. And of course this can be the case for many film scores, and in fact it becomes very useful in film scores. And quite often I do apply a small amount of compression, at least in the master, to just make sure that everything is hitting those peaks and not going over them. But I tend to avoid it if I can just do it manually with volume control here and there and maintain the expressive qualities of the live performances. That is preferable to me, and I think that it would be a good piece of advice for you to take on to make your mixes and your live string sections sound best they can be. So, Thank you very much for watching. I really hope you've gained something from these videos. I will be releasing a full breakdown of exactly what I've just talked through here, but in the style of some of my older videos where I sit down on my computer, share my screen and a project session with you. I will be sharing a film score from a film I did recently called Circling the Drain. So thank you so much for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you could like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, it really helps me out, and leave a comment to say hello. I'd really like to hear from you. Let me know if you want any different videos, if you enjoyed this video, if you didn't enjoy this video, and what you didn't enjoy about this video. Anything to communicate with you guys would be great. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks so much for watching, and have a good one. Bye bye.